summoned you here for a purpose.
TransformYourGame.net.
Welcome one, welcome on, welcome back to the 19th episode of the Transform Your Game podcast. My name is Richard, and I hope you like the sound of my voice because I will be your host and moderator here today. I'll be joined by my three co-hosts, friends, and teammates who are more than meets the eye, Kent, Kai, and Joel. Frequent listeners of the cast will know that usually those three have a little blurb a la "Hey there" at the front of these episodes, but they don't this week because our episode will actually be a continuation of our discussion from last week's episode. We're basically running through a history of the metagames for the Transformers TCG, talking through critical points and axes on which both powerhouse and up-and-coming decks were built on or that they managed to attack. Hopefully our discussion of these points is the type of thing you find helpful or inspirational to your own deck building process. I know that we've been able to generate some new ideas just running through this information and topic ourselves. As far as housekeeping goes, I don't have much other than a correction from last week's episode. I said there that the Hunterbird Memorial Open was on for the beginning of August, but maybe the day after we recorded they updated their site to say that the event has actually been pushed back as far as spring 2021. If that date has or is changed, we will update you guys on that info as soon as we can. Our topic for today, like I mentioned earlier, is deck building for a settled metagame. It's a continuation of our topic from last week. Now, you might be asking, what is a settled metagame? We did define it well last week, but just a quick hit, a settled metagame kind of exists somewhere in the midst of the two typical metagame spectrum endpoints, new metagames and solved metagames. Settled metagames typically have some powerful and noteworthy top contenders, but they also have targets in place for other deck builders to attack, places for people to tune their decks, gain real matchup percentages, and operate with a goal in mind as far as proceeding and generating new ideas or even archetypes. This week we'll be running through the roller coaster ride that was the Wave 4 metagame, following our coverage of Waves 2 and 3 last week. Without further ado, let's dive in.
Yeah, Wave 4 saw like the supreme rise of Mr. Big Boy as the centerpiece character, whether that be Galaxy Optimus or Jetfire or Major Shockwave. It was really all about the big boys and what you could do with them or against them. Like whatever deck you sat down and faced, you knew that like your opponent was going to have a centerpiece character that you had to deal with. And you're going to have to deal with not only their stats, but their abilities that go along with that. So why do y'all think Major Shockwave kind of fell by the wayside in Wave 4?
Well, it's the same reason for why I think Galaxy Prime was the better deck at the same time that Blossom was the better deck. Because even if they miss with their abilities, like Optimus not getting his ability to play an extra upgrade or Blast not getting to play an extra card, they were still on par with the best deck at the time. And if they hit, then they were just leap and bounds above like what Major Shockwave could really do. Because like Major Shockwave is actually pretty, at least the traditional Major Shockwave that I played is traditionally very bad against blue decks because there's only one character swinging for a lot at a time outside of like bigger they are. But yeah, it was just the fact that they had the same access to the secret actions that Shockwave also got as new toys, but they didn't really. They acted on a different axis. Like Jetfire specifically didn't care to lose his hand, and he was able to build that insurmountable wall. And then Galaxy Prime didn't really care about cards either because all he had to do was draw Equipment Enthusiast, and then he was back to full, and then all the work that he did to scrap the hand was for nothing. So, and on top of the fact that Major Shockwave just took so long to set up because he has to have 2 gamma launchers to hit his full potential, and yeah, that just wasn't good enough. It was still the best parts of the big boy blue decks, but it was probably like the least effective of all of them.
I guess Shockwave fell off. He wasn't the dominant deck all the way at the very end of Wave 4, but let's not forget, Kai won PPT Dallas with a Shockwave deck, and Stefan made top 4 at EI with Shockwave deck. I mean, I think part of the reason that that Galaxy Optimus rose the way that he did was simply because Dan Arnold won EI with Galaxy Prime. I mean, if something had happened, I mean, all props to Dan. I'm not saying that he didn't deserve to win an EI or something. Please don't take it that way. I don't mean that at all. But if something had happened, he had some bad draws or made a misplay somewhere or whatever, and he lost and was, say, quote unquote only top 8. I mean, like, I don't know if anybody would have really been all over Galaxy Optimus like they were. I mean, people weren't really on Jetfire, even though Richard was the number 1 seed going into top 8. He got knocked out in the first round, in the single elimination round of top 8, and so it almost seemed like nobody cared about Jetfire. Like, yeah, whatever, that Jetfire deck, it's terrible. It doesn't matter. I mean, and obviously Jetfire was extremely powerful. So I'm not sure that Shockwave is completely gone. I mean, he might be completely gone now, but we're talking about the Wave 4 meta. So I think what made him fall by the wayside was just that that it wasn't the deck that was all the way at the top. So people sort of gave up on it a little bit and stopped working so much on it. They're like, hey, let's look at this Galaxy Prime thing. It just seems like he's just way better. And I mean, I think that Shockwave might be able to make a comeback at some point if they really want to, and that's my personal opinion, that Shockwave didn't necessarily disappear through his own failings as much as it just didn't get the all the way at the top results that people were looking for right at the beginning of the wave, because EI was, and PPT Dallas happened like a week after the set came out, and EI was maybe 2 weeks later. So that was right at the beginning of the meta, and like I was saying, aggro is always at the top at the beginning. That's not necessarily true, because the blue deck was what won EI, but because an aggro deck came in second, and there were other aggro decks like that in the top 8, aggro did seem to take control of the meta, at least at first. Like I think PPT Las Vegas was maybe a week later or 2 weeks later, and an aggro deck won that. So anyway, I know it's just about Shockwave. I didn't mean to break out from Shockwave, but I don't really think that Shockwave disappeared so much just because he's not good enough, but because people just wanted to go in a different direction. And people have been using Shockwave for 5-6 months already because of Wave 3 or however long sets are out for that 4 months, and people just wanted something new. So and Galaxy Prime gave him that.
I think that's a really interesting point you brought up about the fact that there are actually 2 Shockwave decks in top 8 of EI. I cannot remember the other person besides Stefan. He's a good dude. I think he's from Canada, and I think he took a lot of inspiration from Kai's list, if memory serves correctly.
Yeah.
But I'm also remember he had a ponytail. Not that's relevant to anything, but it is part of what my memory recalls, because I'm much better with like facial attributes than I am with names. Anyway, but I think it's a good point you mentioned. Like, EI was so close to the release of Wave 4, right? It was like maybe I think it was less than a month after Wave 4 had been out, and people had not had that much time to test with the set, even though a lot of us had tried to get in as much as we possibly could, right? I think that people started to give up on Shockwave, not necessarily because they were wanting something new, but because a little bit to the last point that Kai made, which was that Shockwave did all the things the big boy or the big bad blue decks with a centerpiece character did, but he just kind of did the different pieces of them not as well as any of the ones that were more specialized or polarized, right? So Jetfire was kind of obviously the best defensive big bad blue guy, right? He could build an insurmountable wall of tough. Like, he put up so much blue on defense, right? Like, I think during the tournament, I defended for 17 more than one time. Like during Swiss, that just happened more than one time during 6 rounds. And I think that, like, if you look at Optimus starts at 8 attack in the mode that he's normally attacking in. He's a deck that naturally wants to include oranges. He gets to play upgrades. He gets to play Matrices of Leadership for free, which is a card that is not something that Shockwave can play, right? It's not something he can play for free during or basically like during combat almost if you're attacking with Optimus first to give your little guys more relevance in combat. So on the offensive combat front, Galaxy Prime just kind of overshadowed Shockwave, and then on the defensive axis, Jetfire overshadowed Shockwave, and then on the card advantage engine, Prime didn't care about cards in hand, and Jetfire had so many cards in hand it never really mattered that he was having to scrap any. So unless you just hit him with like checkpoint into espionage into flip Shockwave, then you could probably run him out of cards, but that would be like the only way that kind of stuff happens, right? And so I think people started to give it up on it like kind of that way over time. That's why I think he kind of fell by the wayside. But what I wanted to say in regards to the fact that it was so close to release at EI was the fact that why do you guys think that it was more obvious this way that blue shells were going to be good and competitive, and it didn't take them as long to develop as it did maybe in previous metagames? Like, what do you guys think about that?
For me, I think it was really obvious when we saw Hidden Fortification and Sabotage Armaments. Those cards immediately made me think, oh, thank God we can play blue again, and maybe have a chance against like blaster craziness. So that gave us a ray of hope, and not only that, but with Jetfire and Optimus both having such high health. So not only do we have new defensive tools, but we also have these characters with like 20 and 21 health, and hey, Jetfire is going to like not only have a million extra paddings out, but is going to just get to draw a card and then put like a handheld blaster back on top of the deck or an energized field or whatever, and that was just nuts. And I do want to say, like, back to EI, first of all, I love the fact that it was so close to the release of Wave 4. It's more like the Wild West, and people actually have to like figure it out instead of the metagame settling, as we were talking about before. And I was also very surprised, like the Las Vegas PPT, when Richard, props to you, you were seed 1 going into top 8 of EI, and no one at any other tournament ever tried Jetfire that I know of, except for us when we went to PAX South and then PPT Orlando.
It was too tall in defense of them. So, most people are really hesitant to play too tall.
Yeah. No, I mean, I get it. I'm just surprised that, like, no one else really gave it a fair shot. So,
most people gravitated towards the 3-wide version.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was basically where it went.
With the airstrike, with Tailwind and Night Flight, was where most people played. Because they wanted to play more mixed and less all-in blue. I think one of the other things that was a problem with my list for most people is you were not quick to kill your opponent or to KO your opponent's spots.
Very
so
true.
if you weren't playing quickly, time could have been an issue. So that was another thing that I think that was less of a consideration for Galaxy because he was naturally faster at closing games and less about establishing inevitability.
So for me, it was basically just Hidden Fortifications and Sabotage Armaments were just leap and bounds above what we had as defensive tools before, and the fact that they were uninteractable at the time outside of Decipher, which didn't interact with them, it just did ping damage. But yeah, it was basically just those two, and the fact that you had Shockwave, which was already perceived to be a good deck before, and now getting even stronger defensive tools, and as well as Prime was on some people's lists, but at the top of people's list at the end of Energon Invitational. And the other guy who got top 8 at Energon Invitational was Aiden. I wanted to make sure that we at least got that, because he was a cool dude.
He was a cool dude.
Just so to answer Richard's question real quick about why blue was dominant early, was because I think it's because Shockwave was the dominant deck at the end of Wave 3, and it was only obvious that the additions of things like Hidden Fortification and Sabotage Armaments which by the way are secret actions that Shockwave could play off the top of the deck, only made that specific blue build stronger, and there weren't super obvious additions to aggressive shells that made them better. So I mean, I think it's possible that when the developers were coming up with this, with Wave 4, with the set, they were looking at what was happening in the game at the time when they were developing these cards, and like bugs and cars were just dominating everything. So hey, we have to combat that. But by the time that the cards came out, well, Shockwave was the dominant deck, and then blue continued to be the dominant color at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I was looking, I think the thing that jumped out to me, you guys were talking about hidden fortifications and sabotage armaments, and I'm sure that everyone here also was including in that bunch Sturdy Javelin, even though they weren't actually saying it aloud, right? But I just was thinking through the Wave 4 spoiler, what tools did aggressive decks get from that? They got a bunch of orange armors and a worse supercharge and head-on collision and stop. That's it. It's just not a lot. There's just not a lot that they gave aggressive shells for, and they gave a lot of new upgrades and defensive tools to the blue shells. So I think that the obvious good battle cards are what dictated people to look towards the blue, the big bad blue decks, or the deck style, that archetype. I think that's one of the reasons why. Not to say that there wasn't aggro decks in the field though, right? There were aggro in the field.
Yeah, and at EI we actually saw the advent of a new aggro deck, which was Airstrike Patrol. And Airstrike Patrol was one of those things where during spoiler season it was obvious how powerful Tailwind was. Giving +2 for just flipping a card is kind of ridiculous, especially when that card can also be paired with an orange card for +3. But I know personally for me, I was playing with a list with the Airstrike, and then I kind of put it to the wayside to play with other lists, and then I ended up forgetting about it. But the Airstrike Patrol deck did top at EI. It got 2 tops, one with the classic Bugs list type deal, where it was General Optimus from Wave 3 and the 3 Airstrike guys, and then or it was with the Nemesis Prime with the 3 Airstrike guys that could also side into Springer and Overwhelming Advantage. But yeah, it was on top of that, and just green +2 was just so powerful that do you guys think that's the reason why Bugs couldn't stick around, or for why that wasn't the only aggressive deck, but it was why couldn't that or the 3 wide Sentinels deck couldn't stick around?
Well, I want to give props to the gentleman that did really well at EI with Bugs. When I saw Bugs in top 8, I couldn't believe it. I was like, how is that deck so busted from Wave 1 and it's still with virtually no changes, still good enough to be competitive in a field this large? I mean, I was super surprised, and I mean, I thought they just got lucky, whatever. But then when I was watching them play, they were very good players. So props to them.
Shout out to Jimmy.
And I'm sure that they started their build the same way that I build any aggro deck that I have. I mean, I put 3 incoming transmissions in there, and then I take them right back out because they're terrible. But anyway, the reason Bugs didn't stick around, and the reason that 3 wide Sentinels that side in Battlefield Legend didn't stick around, it was just so obvious that the Airstrike Patrol decks were stronger. They were 4 wide. I know the Bugs is 4 wide also, but they were 4 wide, and they got that extra bonus from the green, and they got all the extra bonus from General Optimus. I mean, everyone has bold built in. That's crazy. I mean, the deck was super strong. Everyone was swinging for the fences on every swing. It really was pretty obviously the premier aggro deck after it was basically unleashed on everybody at EI, which is, to second what Ken was saying, it's great for a tournament that's going to, crown what we're going to call the, championship of the world kind of tournament, to be a tournament that's not from an established format. I mean, like that's part of the reason that when we started the Player of the Year race, that we wanted our invitational tournament to be a format that's not, just constructed or limited. We're come with some sort of unknown format so that everybody that comes to it has to be innovative and come up with their own idea, and it's a completely unknown format, and I think that's really the best test of skill. I mean, I remember I know that I'm going to totally date myself here and make myself sound super old, but I remember back when I was playing Magic the Gathering, early in Magic the Gathering. I mean, we're talking in the 90s. Okay, yeah, again, like I said, making myself sound old, but there really, I don't want to say there was no internet, but there was nothing. There was no website you go to and just find all the decks that everyone's playing and the total hive mind of this. These are the best decks, and everyone figuring things out like immediately. You had to come up with decks on your own, and I think that's great, and that's what happened at EI and the unleashing of Airstrike Patrol and everybody. It was just like, wow, I looked at those guys and I was like, those little 5-star little terrible guys, they're awful. Who cares? And then they're dominating everybody. I mean, you don't have time to play as every single lineup of every build that's possible. So you just have to go, those cards are bad. I can look at them and tell that they're bad. I'm not going to use them. And then you're like, wow, never mind, those are really good. It was sort of like reprocess, just like taking me to the cleaners at
I love that you keep bringing that up.
I know I've brought it up a bunch of times, but try to reprocess. I was just like, that card's not good. I don't want to give life to my opponent, so I didn't even think about using that card. That's the same sort of thing with Airstrike Patrol. Once it was unveiled, everybody was like, oh yeah, of course those are really good. I mean, look at how strong that is. Well, if quote unquote, of course it was that good, why weren't you playing it? So props to those guys for unveiling that on everyone, and that's why that stuck around, because it's just so powerful from the extra damage, and everyone gets it.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why they were able to outlive Bugs is because they had a more flexible lineup. So one of the things that was a bummer about Bugs was that when Blue was really good, Scrapnel, who was kind of like your best character, right, was just not particularly strong against the Blue decks. He died really easily to direct damage out of combat. If you flipped into his bot mode, he took damage from like the little guys that were accompanying the big bad. He normally didn't live through one strike from the big bad. But with Airstrike Patrol, first of all, they were not very flip intensive. I know I've mentioned that concept a bunch of times, right? Like, you didn't have an order to flip your guys because the Airstrike Patrol really wanted to be, for the most part, in their alt modes where they had stealth when they were untapped, but when they were attacking. So if you needed to flip somebody, it could be the person you were pairing with your Airstrike Patrol, and if you didn't want to flip somebody, it didn't matter because ultimately the stats on your characters were so strong that you could get equity out of your flips later on in the game. And the de facto version of Airstrike Patrol that would feature General Optimus Prime from Wave 3 really didn't even use the part of its turn where it flipped a character for the most part, right? Like, occasionally you would see them flip Night Flight into his into his bot mode for them to get one more defense and potentially live some like meager swing. Occasionally you would see General Optimus flip to his big bad beater mode and get 6 base attack with the bold instead of a 4 base attack in his ult. But like, generally speaking, they just didn't flip their cards very much. But what they were doing in combat was so powerful they were happy to give up that part of their turn. Bugs had less flexibility and could juggle incoming attacks way worse than what Airstrike Patrol could do. Because Airstrike Patrol, because of the optional stealth that it kind of had after you wheeled, and because they had natural width, they could dictate who was going to be their last character in play, so it was always Tailwind, and he was almost always mostly undamaged, and he also almost always had 5 attack and 3 defense before he ever swung. Before you played a weapon on him, before you played an action to buff him, before he hit any oranges. And that's just incredibly good value out of such cheap characters who had a really, really high average damage output. which asked a lot out of your opposing team, right? They either had to have huge defense numbers or health pools, looking at you, Galaxy Prime, that absolutely dwarfed anything else in the game. So I think that's one of the reasons why that they were popular. I think that the 3-White Sentinels deck was not particularly popular. It didn't stick around as much because I can say from personal experience with that matchup that the pre-board games before he went to too tall, he was very easy. It was a very easy matchup, and then after board, I lost every game. And I think whereas the matchup against Galaxy Prime, I think he was better to stay 3-wide and not go to too tall, but because of his experience with me, he went to too tall, and it served him poorly over the course of the games. I think that deck just kind of seemed... It just didn't have as much consistency as I think you might want out of your aggressive deck, and I think that width was just kind of like the name of the game. And I think that if you're looking at width and just the best wide deck happened to be Airstrike Patrol in the Wave 4 metagame. That's why I think. While we're on the topic of like decks that kind of entered the scene, though, it wasn't just Airstrike Patrol becoming the new face of aggro, or the big bads redefining the face of what blue decks look like. We also, and Kent at Dallas, one of the things you were talking about was the combo deck. That was kind of a big player in Wave 4 tournaments as well. Various combo shells.
Well, that's true. I mean the cog combo that Kent played at PPT Dallas. Actually, I mean, like, Kent and I have been working on that deck for
long
weeks,
time.
months. I don't know. We've been working on it for a really long time. We were totally planning on playing it, and for various reasons, I chickened out right before the tournament. I mean, seriously, I still had the tournament. I still had the deck in my bag at the tournament. I was like, man, I just can't do it. So, I mean, it was because, just a few days before the tournament, it seemed like the deck had been unloaded on the hive mind that I was just complaining about.
a weird variation of it that didn't do everything that we needed it to do.
Not our exact build, but it was basically a shot across about, hey, you better be ready for this deck, so have ways to hose it. And here's a perfect way, Turbo Board, which by itself is really not a particularly good card.
212-0.
Right. It's not really a particularly good card, but if you think you're going to be playing combo every round, it's a fantastic bot to have in your starting lineup. So, as it would happen, I was so afraid of everyone having Turbo Board in their deck that I chose to play a different deck, and I main decked Turbo Board. I mean, I had him in my lineup. I was playing Blaster with the regular Blaster lineup, except instead of Fire Drive, I was using Turbo Board. And you know what? I think that tournament right there, which I came in runner-up at, is a great example right there at the beginning of Wave 4 that Shockwave was still good because Shockwave won the tournament, and that Blaster was extremely powerful because I still got second in that tournament, even though I was playing Turbo Board instead of Fire Drive. And the only reason that I came in second was because I was playing Turbo Board, because when I ran into Kent in the top 8, he had not lost a game.
That's not true. I beat him one game in our match.
Did? Oh, all right.
Yeah, when I boarded down to just Jetfire. Remember?
I remember.
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Well, so yeah, I'm sorry. Outside of that one game that Kent had lost, I was playing Turbo Board, and Kent couldn't overcome Turbo Board because we had discovered that the main weakness for the combo deck, and the only thing that could really beat it, because the reason that they banned the card that they did was because you could go off on your opponent's turn, which Turbo Board did not stop. So the only way to really beat that combo deck was to be playing an extremely aggressive deck and just not give them any time to do it. Like a mistake that some people made at that tournament when they were playing against Kent, even if they had Turbo Board in their sideboard or had Caliburst or something, like Caliburst didn't stop it at all, like people thought it would, because Kent was main decking defensive driving. But Turbo Board, a mistake that people would make is they would sit around and try to not kill Cog so that Ken couldn't go off, couldn't do the combo during the turn. So they would give him turn after turn after turn after turn of trying to not kill Cog, and just like Ken set up a perfect hand to go off on their turn when they finally did kill Cog, because you can't not KO Cog. You don't really have a choice. All the other characters have stealth, and you have to attack Cog, and no matter how hard you're trying not to KO him, you have to KO him eventually. So they just gave him a chance to set up a perfect hand. So what I did, or what the deck that I was playing, was the idea was kill Cog as quickly as possible and force him to go off on your turn with no hand setup. So that's what we did. That's why I defeated Kent. Otherwise, I think he would have won that tournament. I think he definitely would have won that tournament handily. So, anyways, combo was a big deal, at least at the very beginning of Wave 4, like right there. I mean, at the very beginning, it's like the set had been out for like a week, I think, at PPG Dallas, and that was easily the best deck there. It would have won had I, not made the deck with Ken and knew exactly what to do to beat it. The Springer combo was really good too. Later, it hadn't been made yet, or maybe it had, but we didn't know about the Springer combo at the time. We had been concentrating on the Cog deck. So combo became a really big thing. Combo was actually really good. It was present at EI. I believe that the player that was playing it at EI went undefeated.
Blaine
Constructed.
Blaine
Right. He went undefeated during Constructed. Just didn't make it through the limited portion with unscathed, which was a lot of people's complaint about there being a limited portion, but that's a completely different discussion. The Springer combo was really good. He also played it at PPT Las Vegas, and he made top 8 there. So I mean, obviously the Springer combo deck was really strong. But there were ways to answer, like with Turbo Board and stuff like that. But that wasn't necessarily a complete answer. But anyway, what do you guys think? How does a true combo deck being part of metagame affect what you do with your decks?
Well, I think that I didn't really get to play too much against the Cog combo before it disappeared from the world as we knew it. RIP, right? Multi-mission gear. But I did theoretically, because when we were preparing for PPT Dallas and like we had seen the post, my playgroup in Austin and I had like discussed what our strategies against that deck would be, and I told them I thought that I was supposed to just board down to Jetfire, and they said that sounds dumb. Can you even do that? Which you can, just for everyone's clarification. That is a legal thing to do. I represented a team who was less than 25 stars. And the reason I did it was because of the fact that when they would attack Jetfire, I could draw a card. Now, none of his characters were going to actually really deal any significant damage in combat to Jetfire just because of the nature of the deck, so I never had to put any of my cards that I drew back, and it let me dig through my deck more regularly to find espionage, to find copies of security checkpoint, because I was trying to force my opponent to give me cards so that I could try and interact with him. Because when I killed Cog, and I was going to kill Cog, the base attack on Jetfire is 6, right? So 2 attacks normally is enough to kill Cog. And when that happens, I want him to have as few resources to go off with as possible, which is the exact same thing that Joel said he was trying to do with his aggressive blaster style strategy in attacking combo. I didn't have access to a turbo board in my sideboard, or to a Caliburst, even though Caliburst ended up not being very good there. What this did in the future for me, though, was it meant that I thought about playing extra copies of interactive spells in my sideboard. I guess not spells, but cards. So like more espionages, or in Wave 5, like counter espionages and stuff like that. We thought about playing, turbo board in our sideboard as our sideboard character. We thought about playing other options, which I think one of the things we'll do is we'll get to in the next portion. We'll talk about beating combo with blue decks. But I also thought that like aggressive shells just generally fared better against combo. And had like multi-mission gear not been banned before you get to EI, I think that I would have had to play an orange shell or combo itself just because of how scary that deck was, personally.
I gotta say, that moment when we played at PPT Dallas and you boarded down to Jetfire, I was just like, what is this guy doing? And like it made zero sense to me. I was like, obviously he thinks he's gonna get an advantage this way, and it took me one attack to go, oh yeah, that's really bad. And dude, that game, you espionaged me and checkpointed me multiple times, and I just was never able to go off, and you were just able to keep digging for it, and you got it. And slowly, like once you killed a couple of my guys, I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm gonna ever deal any damage to him, so let's go to the next game. Yeah, it was just crazy. And then like the beauty of that deck was being able to go off on the opponent's turn when they had turbo board, and like normally I should have won that blaster matchup. Because man, I played that so many times with blaster starting turbo board, and the majority of the time I would win that. I just wasn't able to that time. It's just too aggressive of a draw from Joel, and I couldn't get it to go off in time. Man, I really loved that deck so much. And then the one that Blaine made with Springer, I thought was a work of genius. I mean, I really, really enjoyed that deck, and that's kind of where combo is now. Is Springer is the centerpiece character. You're able to get multiple actions again, so you don't have to worry about multi-mission gear. And there's different variations of it too. There's the EMP lock that you can do with Springer, which is really cool. And then there's a traditional daring escape as well. And I think like those decks right now are just fine. There is nothing wrong with them because they're not going off on turn one like what I was doing, or turn two. I mean, it was just that was insane. That was way over the line, and I'm glad WotC stepped in as quickly as they did, because anytime like a deck becomes degenerate, I think it hurts the game if they don't react fast enough. And I know sometimes, and everyone's going to have their own opinion, but sometimes people have given WotC some not fine words for not banning like Oko as fast as they thought they should have. But like I got to give it to the Transformers team, like they did the right thing really quick. Both with swap parts and with multi-mission gear. Like once it was out there, they made a decision and got rid of it very quickly, and major props to them for that. Anytime things are degenerate, or maybe not even degenerate, but where it funnels the entire metagame around like one card or one type of strategy that just is repeated over and over and over and over, where it feels like every matchup you play, you're gonna be playing against this. Like, that's not healthy for the game, and I think it really restricts a lot of the choices that you can make as far as deck design and sideboards and everything. It just really, like I say, it just funnels it down to this like very small world that you can play in when things get that bad.
Yeah, it could eliminate like half of your sideboard too.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is a really good thing to like, if you're expecting it to be part of the metagame, right? Like you have to make those concessions, right? Like because you can't, most of the time you cannot ignore that that's going to be something that's going to appear. But I will say this, like it puts a huge toll on your sideboard normally, whether it's the choice of character, which is a huge resource, or if it's like 3 or 4 of your 10 sideboard cards, right? Like that's a big chunk of your options throughout the tournament that are just dedicated to this one, quote unquote, to use your words, degenerate type of matchup.
Correct.
Originally, when Combo was kind of like making its advent on the scene, aggressive shells proved to be more harrowing opponents for Combo decks to face when they weren't executing their quote-unquote nut draws. So over time, we started to see blue decks adapt to that as well. And the major way that happened was the card Thrust, Supersonic Interceptor from Wave 2, started to make his way into sideboards for people that were to bring in for games 2 and 3 against the Combo decks. Now, then we started to see the Combo decks target that idea by sideboarding into a plan where they brought in extra paddings and more blue pips to up their kind of native defense. This is more the Springer version because Cog had been neutered at this point, right? So they started to, kind of get in this arms race for who could do more damage, or sustain more damage over the course of the post-board games. And then, so I don't know that at PAX South, and we were leading it to PAX South, Kent had the idea when we were talking about taking Jetfire that he thought it was necessary for us to play Thrust mainboard. The Thrust mainboard gave us enough points and enough matchups, and the fact that since we were already playing too tall, that we had access to a more defensive option in Aimless out of the sideboard with the star cards, that was a totally reasonable concession to make as far as deck building went. When I went to PAX South and I played my first event, because I couldn't get there on Friday. I think I had to get there I guess I couldn't get there on Thursday. I got there on Friday, right? My first event, I went through with the Aimless mainboard, and I lost my win in because I punted it away. But I will say this: I brought in Thrust in every single matchup, and I wish I had a mainboard in every single matchup. So the next time, I played Thrust in my mainboard for every event on Saturday. And I made it to top 4, and then the top 4 of PAX South was like all of these mainboard Thrust decks, and it was absolutely nuts. I know that like when I played against Kai, one of the things I did was like he was playing Galaxy Prime with Thrust as opposed to my Jetfire with Thrust. Now I had a really good draw in all of our games, but I do think that like there was an interesting question as to what considerations each of those characters actually made you think about when you were bringing Thrust in. But that brings us to, after that tournament, actually only a week, we went to PPT Orlando, and that is where the next evolution of the metagame took us.
Oh man, and like, yeah, I gotta tell my version of the David Burgos story. So I'm in top 8 already, and so is he, but we decided to play a game for fun, because we drew with each other to draw in the top 8. We're both undefeated at that point, I believe. After we'd been talking about whatever for like 30 minutes, we really hit it off. Dude is a great guy.
We had IHOP after the tournament with him.
Oh yeah, man, we had such a good time at IHOP after with him. But he's like, well, I'll tell you, it's something you've never played against, and you've never seen, and you've never heard about. And if you're not ready, you're dead. I'm like, oh, cool. Let's play a game for fun. And I just like pull out I think our Galaxy Optimus build, which we didn't think was as good as the Jetfire. And he just ransacked me. I mean, it was not even remotely close. And I was just like, how do you beat that deck? And he's like, if you're playing blue, you don't. And I've just never been stomped that hard, that fast, and just left dumbfounded. I've never been pierced for that much either. So then, first round of top 8, I get paired with him, and I'm like, oh no. And he's like, yeah, sorry, I know you're playing, Jetfire because you told me. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I've got a way to stop this. And sure enough, I didn't. I think the match was over in like 15 minutes. Like that, I think I spent more time sideboarding than I did actually playing our game 2. I mean, dude pierced me 13. I mean, in one swing. And I was just like, what do you do about this? And in retrospect, I was like, W5 Gyro Blaster would have been good, but I didn't have any in my board. Mm-hmm. So that would have been the answer if I could draw it. But maybe even then it wouldn't have been the answer. Maybe it wouldn't have been enough. But I mean, like, man, I I have never been like bashed that hard that quickly in a game that I thought I had my mind completely wrapped around. So with the Burgos Bold, what do you guys think made the deck so surprising?
So for people who don't know what the Burgos Bold is, it was basically a 4-wide deck that was playing every single orange-black card available in the game at the time, and every time you swung, you were swinging for 6 Pierce 6, 5 Pierce 5. Basically, you were trying to match your attack swing with your Pierce number because you had both Demolisher and Lionizer for a large amount of pips to flip. But the reason why it was so surprising was because there was just not a deck that was able to just do that much guaranteed damage at the time and stay 4-wide, and it was also just something that basically a brand new archetype, because the orange-black cards, we knew they were good. Like, Fight for Position was obviously good and Wedge Formation was good, but there were some very unplayable ones like Opportune Repairs, which he technically couldn't even play, but he played them for the pips. So it was very surprising that something like that was able to just come out of the woodworks and just mollywop its way to a second place finish. So yeah, big props to David Burgos.
I actually wonder if the Wizards team had that deck in their Wave 4 builds internally.
I would not be surprised if they did.
Actually, I seriously doubt that, based on the number of orange-black cards that they made in this wave.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Just like I was saying with how the defensive cards like Hidden Fortification and Sabotage Armaments were almost an answer to a meta that had kind of already gone away, because it's not like it's not like this game comes out every week or something. You know, it's not like a weekly magazine or something. It's months in development. So they develop these cards months in advance. They're like, oh yeah, we need to answer this, or we need to give more to this, and oops, it's too late. I mean, like, I think the Burgos Bold deck was, I know it was right at the end of the wave, but it was virtually unanswerable by anything that anybody was playing, and now they just added like a million cards that make it better. Because the thing about that deck, like, Kent called me during the tournament after he drew with David and was like, dude, what am I gonna do about to play this deck? I said, I guess you just, play and hope that you win. I mean, like, I don't know, like, just whatever. And so when he showed me this deck after he came back from Orlando and I picked up, I was like, dude, this deck is awful. How did this deck beat you? I mean, I'm just like looking through the cards. I'm like, you can't play this, you can't play this, you can't play this this is awful. And then we play one game and I completely stomped and I went, man, this deck's really fun. I mean, like, I'm looking at 3 cards in my hand that are completely unplayable. Who cares?
Good
Swing.
moment.
Oh, yep. Take 7. You can't stop that. I mean,
the best one was
pick
up Wedge Formation, because it did do, like, it was like a playable card. So like when you saw Wedge Formation in that deck, you're like, yes, a playable card.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many terrifying resilience. There's horrible cards in that deck. I mean, like, it seemed like half the deck was unplayable. It was almost like during Wave 1, if you could run 20 Peace Through Tyrannies in your bug deck, would you have done it?
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
Every time.
Probably. So I mean, it was sort of like that. I mean, and Kai said, well, we knew this card was good, and this card was good, and this card was good. I don't think that we did. Like, I don't think that we knew that Fight for Position was a good card. I think we just thought it was a really bad supercharge.
I think I called it a bad supercharge earlier in this podcast.
I mean, yeah, it was just a bad supercharge. I mean, the deck is full of suboptimal cards, and you look at the lineup and you're like, okay, thanks for the easy win, bro. And then they start attacking. You're like, It's almost like if you're sitting down against someone that's playing Whirl right now, and you're like, thanks for the easy win. And then if they beat you somehow, you're like, I don't believe that just happened. I mean, like, it's, you look at their deck, you look at this deck, and that's what I'm saying. It was so surprising and exciting at the same time. I mean, it's like, wow, how does this deck actually win when you're basically not playing any relevant cards?
Yeah, I think that it's a beautiful piece of targeting a metagame. So there are several axes, and we interviewed David, and he did a deck profile with DefTF Stefan over on his YouTube channel after the tournament, right? Where he talked through some key points, right? Now this is the final evolution of the deck. Like, we had a couple other versions that we built after that. I know you guys added like Heat of Battle and stuff to it. But so the deck was really cool in several ways, because it was all these blue decks were trying to have this arms race, right? Where they were trying to if they're playing Thrust, they're just trying to output damage as high as possible and have the highest defense as possible from the configuration of the pips in their deck, then the easiest way to do that is to have characters that either can't or don't care if they die during the early parts of the turn, and that swing for high guaranteed damage ignoring defense. So just like maxing out on orange-black cards, if you can actually play them, if you're so much better than the metagame decks in combat, it doesn't matter if you can't play your cards, right? Like, it doesn't matter, because you're hitting on the single most important resource in the game. I cannot hammer this home in enough of these podcasts, that combat is the major resource that you are governing, that you are managing during this game, right? And it was so good on that axis in this metagame that it didn't care about ignoring half or all of the other part of its turn, right? And then the other thing that he was doing was, because he said specifically, he was bad against traditional aggro. So Airstrike Patrol ate him for breakfast. And I think a good reason for one of the things he did that was smart against that was he included main deck Force Field. He included Vanguard in his lineup so that he got to at least dictate where his opponent's attacks were going on the draw, and then when he was on the play, he could do things like get multiple turns of value out of his really important attackers. If your opponent had to attack Lionizer twice before they KO'd him, and you got to swing for 7 damage every single time, you would take that trade in a heartbeat. It's not even a question.
Yeah, Vanguard made it almost impossible for me to kill him. I was doing that exact same thing, trying to kill Lionizer and then disarm him away once he was an upgrade. And it was just no, flip to white, you don't get to kill him yet.
Exactly.
I'm no! Vanguard was clutch.
Yeah, he identified what he was good against, and then he identified what he was bad against, and he decided that sacrificing very, very few points against what he was good against earned him quite a few points in the matchups that he didn't actually feel favored in, and that is a masterful piece of deck tuning, and a really, really good example of the types of things you should be considering when you're building and improving and iterating on your decks over the course of you attacking an established metagame. That's one of the reasons why I love this deck, is because it's probably the biggest or most key example of what we were talking about when we talked about the original actual topic of this cast.
I think Wave 4 was probably my favorite meta, just because, the combo thing, obviously, but the surprise of the David Burgos deck, and the fact that, our team, we had figured out to play Thrust main board. We looked at the metagame, we determined, hey, everyone's going to play Jetfire or probably Galaxy Optimus, and we were right. And we knew going first or second, if we had Thrust main board, we were going to win that game. We looked at the metagame, we looked ahead, and made a conscious choice to win game 1 that way. David looked at it a different way. He was like, yes, everyone is going to play Jetfire or Galaxy Optimus or Major Shockwave. It's going to be blue, and I'm just going to have a deck that runs them over. And they will not have an answer to it, and there you go.
Absolutely. All right, well, that brings us to the close of episode 19 of the Transform Your Game podcast. Thanks for joining us for the Wave 4 coverage of this topic in context. We really did want to make it to Wave 5, not just this week, but actually in last week's episode, if you can even believe that. But I guess you'll just have to join us next week when we really get to some of the juicy stuff discussing the recently released Wave 5 Titan Masters Attack metagame. I can't let you, our listeners, know enough how much we appreciate all of you out there in the ether listening, whatever platform you're on. You can find our other episodes and more down the line on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify, or wherever your podcast needs get met, and we will absolutely have some links in the description to help you out there. And if you found the input and information here valuable, you can find more strategy, analysis, tournament reports, and more like it at transformyourgame.net. We look forward to being back to speak to all y'all next week, but until that time, clear eyes, flip bots, can't lose.